This is a presentation about herbaceous plants in the McCrory Gardens in Brookings, South Dakota, and it's a brief study of plant interactions and seasonal changes that these plants undergo. This research was conducted as part of an independent study class with the goals to further develop my research skills, learn more about herbaceous plants, and study plant interactions and how plants change with the changing seasons. The methods of study were weekly visits to McCrory Gardens and studying of a 44 species list of plants, all herbaceous plants. Weekly photos of these plants were taken. Data was taken from the end of September to the end of October, and recorded a variety of things, including sun conditions, evidence of seasonal changes, phenological stage, plant-plant interactions, plant-animal interactions, and plant-human interactions. So this is a graphic of the composition of the species list. So the first pie chart on the far left is the native versus introduced plants. So most of the list was introduced just because of what McCrory Gardens happens to grow. They do have a lot of native plants there, but also a lot of native plants tend to be already in that senescence stage by the time this study began in the fall. About an even split of annual versus perennial plants, and a majority of forbs as opposed to grasses, which once again is just based on what McCrory Gardens has. Most ornamental plants tend to be forbs over grasses. For the most part, not many plant-plant significant reactions were recorded. The most common thing to see was plants having interactions with themselves, which for the majority of plants, being around other individuals of the same species is not harmful. This is not always the case with allelopathic plants, but for the most part is not a significant reaction. The second most commonly observed one, and the one you can see in the pictures below, is dandelion growth. Anyone who's ever gardened before knows that dandelions can be quite persistent. It usually made sense that there was a lot of dandelions growing. They're really great at reproducing, and they can grow in a lot of areas. They especially like areas with moist soil and full sun, which tended to be kind of abundant within these areas that, when they grew within plants. But the plants that did have dandelions growing around them didn't seem to perform better or worse than plants that didn't have dandelions around them. Another common plant interaction that's not shown below but was common in more mixed plant beds was plants shading other plants, but I typically found that this was done intentionally, so the plants that were being shaded were plants that tended to have more shade tolerance, and so it was actually a helpful plant-plant interaction that can be specifically planned for. The main plant-animal interaction found was insect damage on plants. I found this kind of surprising because, as someone who has gardened before, I did expect small mammals to be the main plant-animal interaction, just because if you've ever gardened before, you know that they tend to get into plants and eat them up quite a bit. But insects prove to be the more formidable opponent for these plants. This is kind of unexpected because usually insects are populations are lowering at the point of when this study took place, but the upper Midwest is experiencing later freezes than expected, which has led to insect populations surviving later into the season. So in South Dakota, we have a lot of different species of insects, some that eat plants and some that eat other insects. And the insects that eat other insects tend to move to plants when they can survive this late in the season. So usually they eat aphids, which are small plant-eating insects, but when those die off earlier in the season and these carnivorous insects are still alive, they have to eat something to survive, so they turn to plants. You can see some bites from insects, especially on this picture on the right. There is a lot of little plant in holes from insects. There's a little bit of stuff on this picture on the left. But overall, a lot of this insect consumption was found of the plants. So this is a bar graph that shows that increase in insect damage. So in those first, this one is just 3 weeks. So the first week, about 15% of the observed plants had insect damage, and then by the end, it was closer to 25%. It's not a huge increase, but that late in the season, it's not typical to see that much damage by insects. So I mentioned this when I was talking about insects, but this is more in depth about the unusual first frost. So the average in Brookings is on the 18th of September. And in 2025, the first frost occurred on October 22nd. So this is a 34-day difference than what was expected. And the results of that are plants survived much longer. So a bit of unusual data just because that first frost did come so late. So a big part of why that first frost is important is because it indicates when a lot of plants are going to enter senescence. So this is the final phenological stage of plants. It's when cell death occurs in plants and they start to turn brown and have other effects. So you can see leaves changing color. You might see certain parts of the plant starting to decompose. It's not uncommon to see parts of the plant entering senescence and other parts of the plant still looking green and alive because some plants sort of do it in sections. The most common way that people see this is leaves changing color when fall starts. But on this slide, there's a couple pictures of plants starting to enter that final stage. So this is another graph indicating the percent senescence of the observed plants over time. So this is another 3-week spread. So on October 6th, a little over 20%, nearly 25% of the plants observed are entering that senescence stage. October 13th is a little bit more, and there's a pretty significant jump at the final observation at nearly 75% of the plants. Note that that final observation is still before the first freeze in South Dakota this year. So the freeze is not always when plants enter that stage, but it's usually the final stop for plants in South Dakota. But before that stage was even, or before that frost even occurred, quite a few plants had already entered that stage. So these are some pictures of a few native plants that were growing at McCrory Gardens. So you have blazing star on the left, or gay feather is another name for it. And then on the right, a variety of goldenrod. Both of these plants looked like this from the first observation date in September. They're both warm season native plants in South Dakota, so once the temperatures start to drop at all, they tend to enter at least partial senescence. So you can see that happening with these plants. That was kind of a trend in the native plants at McCrory Gardens, is that a lot of the native plants tended to enter senescence earlier than the introduced or ornamental plants. So this is an example of a plant and on its first observation and its last observation. So this one, the first observation is on that October 6th date, and then the last one is October 19th. You can see some of those senescence attributes. The plant has lost quite a bit of its green color. There's only one flower left on that picture on the right, if you can see that. And overall, the plant has changed quite a bit with the season. And so this variety of cosmos obviously reaches senescence before that first freeze, since that picture on the right occurred before that October 22nd date. Thank you for listening to this presentation. Here are the references I used, and have a great rest of your day.